So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking your time from your day or evening or night, wherever you are joining us from, to be with us. Today is extra special because we are celebrating leaders who are really building climate resilience where it matters the most. In villages, in neighborhoods, in grassroots movements around the world. And these are the leaders who are protecting our forest, who are building community resilience, who are ensuring food security and fighting for climate justice, not just locally, but globally. Next slide, please. So our goal for today is we hope you walk away with how these women-led organizations approach climate action across multiple scales, discover ways to support or partner with grassroots initiatives who are working on food, water, or climate justice, and also be able to connect grassroots action with innovation and entrepreneurship to really advance community-led solutions. And this session is hosted by Women in Cleantech and Sustainability. We are a global nonprofit operating in Europe, North America. We have roughly 8+ chapters. We're continue to grow. We focus on gender parity. We focus on building diverse network. We are honestly preparing thought leaders of tomorrow, especially in clean tech and sustainability spaces. I want to do a quick shout out to our sponsor today, Centric Software. Centric Software, thank you for sponsoring this event. Agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to dive into introductions and then have a 30-minute of moderated discussion touching on few key themes. And then we'll have last 15-20 minutes of Q&A. We would love to have you think about those questions as we are having these discussions. And feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be using chat to monitor and collect those questions. Hi, everyone. I'm your host. I'm your moderator, Parul Sharma. I am the co-chair of Women in Cleantech and Sustainability. I spent last decade building digital tools and ecosystem and really empowering communities at Sierra Club. And I am currently serving several mission-aligned organizations and helping them grow. One statement that resonates with me as we host this discussion is that climate change is a systems problem, but its solutions are really built into people, places, and purpose. I want to give a quick shout out to Allison, who is our board of director, and Banu, who's the member of WCSSF, and for helping us host this event.
Thanks, Parul. Happy to be here. Thanks, Banu, for putting us out.
Thank you. Before I introduce our amazing panelists, I would love to see where you all are joining us from. So if you could please share your name, where you're joining us from, and one word that inspire your climate journey. We would love to see. And while you do that, I want to say this truly is a global panel because I know Allison is joining us from Europe. Alana, you just got back from COP30 Brazil and you are in Colombia. Jenna is sitting in New Zealand. And Naranjali, you're in New York. And here I am sitting with Banu in Bay Area.
I'm in DC.
Oh, DC.
Same time zone.
All right. Okay. And I'm seeing here, okay, wow. People, Sarah, Bay Area. Okay. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Next slide, please. Yes. It's my honor and privilege to introduce these amazing change makers. Naranjali, she's the Action Aid USA head. Elena is the face of Latin America, particularly Colombia for 350.org, and Jenna is the executive director and founder of Water4Life. Welcome, ladies. I would love for you to share a bit about your work in your organization. We can go in the order of Naranjali, Elena, and Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Parul, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you to everyone who's joined. I'm the executive director of ActionAid USA. ActionAid overall is a global federation. We operate in about 70 countries. We work with about 45 billion people overall. And I would, in brief terms, classify us as an international development and humanitarian organization. We are deeply, deeply embedded, though, into the social fabric of the communities we work with and have a strong leaning towards social justice. My specific expertise is in climate change and human rights. And so I have been in the climate space in my previous work life, but at ActionAid, I'm part of thinking about the integration between climate justice and women's rights and economic empowerment.
Thank you, Naranjali. Welcome. Elena.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Parul and everyone else for this space. My name is Elena, I'm based in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm regional organizer at 350. 350 is an organization based on climate justice that believes in people's power as the main kind of vessel to get into true climate justice. It is historically focused on working with communities that are currently resisting fossil fuel extractivism projects all around the world. And right now, our mission is also very much focused on solutions and towards a just and equitable transition out of fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna, and I'm the executive director of Water4Life. And again, as everyone's echoing, just thank you, Parul, and the Clean Water Tech team through Cleantech Group to really welcome us all to be able to speak here. And Water4Life is supporting families to have access to clean water in the communities of Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, which is the southwest region of Guatemala, home to 400,000 residents there. And really, our work is empowering Indigenous women to be educators and advocates for clean water, from health and well-being to filtration deliveries, gray and black water management systems, working through permaculture design and low-tech solutions.
Thank you, Jenna. Welcome. I guess without further ado, let's dive into our first theme for today, which is women as climate leaders. This theme really explores what changes when women lead local climate solutions. Climate leadership often means summits and policies, and but most of the innovation and these solutions come from women living in crisis every day, adapting to rainfalls, season shift, or where their familiar crops get disappear. And as food providers and as water managers in their communities, they are developing strategies that prioritize resilience and food security over these large infrastructure. Yet their voices remain largely absent from the formal climate policies. And that's the discussion we want to dive into. And Niranjali, I'm going to start with you. You work with women farmers who are adapting to drought and floods and shifting seasons caused by climate change. What climate adaptation strategies are women developing that you feel like mainstream climate policies are missing?
Thanks, Parul, for the question. So one comment I want to make before diving into specifics is that often what I see even in the national, but also in the international climate spaces, is that because of the scale of the problem and the scale of finance that's needed to solve or to support communities who need to adapt, there is a an orientation or an inclination to find that one solution, right? The one size fits all strategy that's going to help farmers adapt. What's the drought resistant seed, right? Or what's the one type of innovative finance tool that's going to work? We'll just do a bunch of microloans or we'll do insurance. And the thing that I really want to stress in the experience that we have is that there isn't a one size fits all solution. And really, what rather than thinking large scale about one thing, we need to be thinking big about smaller scale solutions that are actually responsive to the realities of people on the ground.
Mhm.
The example I want to talk about very quickly comes from Kenya. As many of you know, Kenya has been struggling with drought and weather pattern changes. The Horn of Africa crisis has been ongoing for many years. And Lydia on the left and Elizabeth on the right are two women who have been struggling to keep their farms alive. One of the things that's important to note is that because of economic hardship, men have left rural contexts and gone to urban centers to find economic opportunity, which means that women are left both with childcare responsibilities and with running the farms and managing water. And what we did in this project in Kenya, in two districts, was to work together with the women to identify what are the challenges they're seeing, both in terms of the drought, but the surrounding challenges, like what are their financial inclusion challenges? And let's see if we can find something that works across the board for that. One of the adaptation strategies that we have seen from all of these contexts is it's an approach called agroecology. And it is an alternative to large-scale industrial farming or monoculture farming. It is like I don't want to go into too much into details, but it is essentially a much more integrated approach where you do multi-crop farming, you reduce waste. There's much less water needs if you use these approaches. There's no one approach. It's like it's a way of trying to understand what will suit different climates. And we matched that knowledge, and the women chose then what worked for their farms. And you can see that after many years of drought, their farms are now, these are pictures from earlier this year, their farms are now starting to thrive. And we coupled that with financial inclusion, where it's Lydia on the left. They started a savings and loan program with some of the funding that we provided. So they create a revolving door of funding that they can access that's easier to access than if they tried to apply for a loan with a bank. And this then helps their economic empowerment and will allow them to kind of determine the path of their own development. I'll stop there.
That's amazing. Thank you for bringing these perspective and stories, Naranjali. Jenna, I know you and I have been working together with Water4Life for a couple of years now. I would love for you to share a story or, your experiences where women leadership has transformed water access in Guatemalan community, particularly, and how this water access is related to women empowerment. I know that story, but I would love for you to share that with our audiences.
Yeah, and I would love to share about that. I would also just like to suggest sharing the next slide. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so specifically, with our work with water filtration systems and water initiatives within Guatemala, as many people in this room know, the access to water is scarce in many different communities around the world. And specifically in Guatemala, there's a lot of issues. This land, that the lake that we're working in, is a caldera, and that is a volcanic it's created a volcanic hole where water fills up into this lake where there's no outlet. So this is a place where a lot of contamination can happen, and all the surrounding villages, their waste is going directly into that water basin, which then goes back into the drinking water for families. So at the base of having access to water is foundational. And so when we were bringing in water filtration systems and education into the communities, 95% of those that arrived to the education programs were women. And we really, of course, knew that the men were out working, or as Niranjali was saying, is many people are because of financial scarcity, they have to go into other places, into urban spaces or other countries to bring money back into their family. So it becomes this providership of these basic, the resources for the family, the cooking, the water, the food. And so, we understood at the foundation, water access is the woman, is the foundation for health. And, you can even take it in a very contextual way of, we are birthing women, we're birthing babies in water. And so we are living beings within water. And so when we talk about how do we bring in this education within communities in such foundational ways, it has to be worked through women empowerment. And so, I'll share that picture on the left where it's Abby, Martha, Marai, and Nora is we're empowering Indigenous leaders through different communities. And what I love about this picture is that they're also women from different areas within Guatemala and different Indigenous or groups. So they all speak a different Mayan language. And it's all about having leaders within their own communities bring in education programs, which then starts the conversation that it's not just about access to clean water, but it's what are the foods that we're eating? How are we making sure we're protecting our water bodies? And so Marta on the left, second to the left, she was one of our leaders that came into the community, and after doing a delivery of filtration systems, she went back in to do follow-up surveys with the families. And when you empower a leader, this is the first time that they're getting in front of their community and sharing and speaking about something that needs to be changed within their community. It's, you see them going through, the nervousness to share or the nervousness to be able to speak for something that's really important for the well-being of their family and communities. And then there becomes this point where they get so into their power of saying, this is the beginning to many different ways that we can bring impact for our homes. So she had shared with me, this was actually about 2 weeks ago, she broke down crying of the impact of what the work that she's doing is, she's going into these humble homes. Of course, they're her neighbors, but when you go to see the impact of what a water filtration system can do, it becomes extremely emotional for any of those leaders. And then that experience for them to see firsthand of, wow, this is not only helping families, but this is extremely needed for these families. And so from there it became the opportunity she's going full force into choosing different systems of where she wants to put biodigesters and gray and black water management systems, which I'll go later into more information about that. But just a little story
Yeah,
about that.
thank you. Thank you, Jenna. Wow, how powerful. Elena, I'm going to move and talk about 350. 350 has been organizing grassroots movement across the globe. And I know in our previous conversation, you mentioned that Latin America, particularly Colombia, women has faced significant challenges. But you also said that they also showed remarkable resilience and found their inner power. Could you share any specific examples in your experiences from your work, how this women leadership transformed their communities?
Yes, absolutely, Parul. Thank you. So, just to give a bit of context, as you say, well, unfortunately, in many parts of Latin America, especially Colombia, being a land defender can be extremely dangerous, no? So, I mean, for example, last year, over 89 land defenders and social leaders were killed in Colombia for their jobs, no? For their work defending their communities and their territories. Um, so what we do is support also these leaders in their resistance to take care of their territory and their land. So one of the best examples that, I've been having the honor to work with for many years is Esnea Saavedra, who you see on the left. She's a Yucpa leader of the Socorpa territory that is located in the Colombian Caribbean, where she and her community are resisting over 5 open cast coal mines. As we know, fossil fuels are the main drivers of the climate catastrophe that we have now. So it is very important to work with these leaders in their protection of their land, no? And the example that you see on the right also is the ways in which we work together to internationalize the struggle and the fight for the territory. So right there we are in London in the main offices of Glencore, that is the a multinational corporation that is doing these new forms of extraction and colonialism in Colombia. And I think, yeah, Esneda is an amazing example of a leader. She is the first woman leader in the Yukpa peoples, and she's been elected 3 times as a leader. And because of her leadership, she has also encouraged this fight to become global and to be able to draw bridges all across the world, where we can support each other in this resistance. So in the case of the Socorpa territory, this territory has now, for example, 100% their own energy sovereignty. They hold also their own institutions for health as well. So yeah, for me, it's an honor to keep working with leaders such as Esnea, that despite what it means, no, in places like Colombia to defend the land and the territory, they teach us to keep going and to draw strong bridges across the world to resist the extraction of fossil fuels.
Thank you, Elena. From these stories, sounds like we have so many challenges, yet we are seeing incredible success. I love this optimistic picture that we are and the future that we are moving towards. With that, I'm gonna ask, can we flip the slide, please? Yeah, ask us to move towards the next theme, which is local action to global impact. This theme really explore how we connect local community-led action to large systems like funding, policies, innovation, technology, and grassroots movements. Many of the most effective solutions, like Jenna, you were talking about local filtration system or land stewardship that Alana you were mentioning, and grassroots disaster response network are really created by communities themselves. These are approaches that are rooted in their lived experiences, right? But they often or sometimes outperform the high-tech top-down interventions. But to grow their impact, these efforts really need alignment with the global movements, right? Support, and they need supportive policies. They need funding that truly reaches to the frontline communities. I'm gonna ask. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, I'm gonna ask with you, Jenna. You have been working in Guatemalan community. Can you describe what these community-led filtration system look like? And you have a amazing image here. And why these low-tech are better for sustainability, and what role can startup and tech entrepreneur in the audiences we have quite a few can support and the this kind of community infrastructure.
Yeah. So as you're looking on the screen right there these are some of the different systems that we work within for Water for Life, and it's through a permaculture design biofiltration system. And the reason why we started working within this is because at the basis, what I think, being able to share about this in the entrepreneurial startup industry is you really want to meet the needs of the community and meeting what is their indigenous wisdom and knowledge and the way that they've been trained for many years within their families of how to be in connection to nature. I think that's one of the big things that we realize within Guatemala is, they wash their clothes in the lakes, it's in the rivers, because not only is that an access to water that's scarce for many places, but it's also there's a connection to nature. And so when we were working within the systems is like, okay, we can bring in these really high tech systems, but if it's not maintained or managed, it requires, say, a government agency or an NGO to maintain that, and that's not sustainable. And so it has to be led and maintained by the locals to for the systems to be maintained. But you have to meet where they're at in their connection and they're farmers at the heart, you know. It's and so when we're bringing in systems of what we're seeing right here is on the bottom right. So this is a biofiltration system where you are taking gray water directly from families' homes and you putting it into a sediment tank, which is what you see in the middle picture. And then you put this into an underground irrigation system. So it's you're building trenches out, you have different layers of gravel, and you have a PVC pipe, very easy materials to get in Guatemala, where it's perforated holes, which is slowly seeping out the water, the contamination water into plants. And this can be resources back into the community, such as bamboo or malanga, coffee trees, banana trees. And these are a way to absorb the contamination, but then bring resources back. And so it can take a lot of the hillsides that we work in, the terrain that we have is very steep slopes. And so being able to take the water and turn eroded pieces of land into resources back into the community. And this is all, once you put these systems in, it's the root, it's the earth that's bringing in these technology, or it's supporting low tech for these communities. But where you can still integrate, where I'm showing you the biodigester in the top section, which is managing black water, which then integrates more technology for the families, but still maintains a low tech solution. And so, you know, when it's the question of, you know, what can climate tech entrepreneurs play in supporting, it's really meeting the communities at its needs in a way that can be low maintenance so that it's in their hands versus relying on NGOs or government organizations to maintain those systems.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. Elena, how does, movement like 350, which are so large, so global, work with local organizations, especially like water or food access groups, to really build that united climate front? And in your opinion, what does this partnership look like between global large movements with local community groups?
Thank you, Parul. Yes, so talking about some examples of what you mentioned here, is how to bring about really a holistic type of solutions, no? So realizing that when we talk about, a just transition, it is way beyond just energy and the energy matrix, but it has to be about land sovereignty, food sovereignty, and I think most of all, empowerment, no? So that this transition isn't about, a massive imposition of other forms of multinational corporations going into these territories that have been historically impacted by fossil fuels and replicating a lot of the structures as before. But then how can this transition be about, futures beyond extractivism that taking a holistic approach about energy, food, water, and the rest? And to give an example here, on the left is the Just and Popular Transition Festival that we did in Colombia, in Valledupar, where we had over 150 community leaders share and organize together about the post-extractive futures that they're building beyond coal. So in these communities and territories where the main source of economy is fossil fuels and coal, for example, it has to be from the communities themselves that we learn, the needs and the impacts of the new economies that we're able to see. So, for example, in this festival, we had a fair type of fair where we had over 120 initiatives and what I like to call post-extractive economies that are related to basically going back to the land and seeing how economies beyond extractivism can thrive. To give the example of this festival here, we had from grassroots communities all the way to ministries of environment and the internal ministries in Colombia, to make sure that we can have, as much impact as possible. On the right, you also see one of the mobilizations that we had in El Cerrejón, which is the biggest open coal mine of Latin America, together with the Wayu community. And, this was very important because just as I'll talk about later, it is the same communities that are in resistance of fossil fuels that are also the ones that are bringing currently the solutions, because they're the ones that know the territory, know the communities and the organizations. So I think I would really stick to that, like the power of community autonomy and sovereignty when deciding the way forward and the future and the way that they want to build these new economies and these new social structures. So I think, when we really emphasize in creating local solutions that are able to have a global reach and amplify the solutions that come from the territories and that come from the communities, and we're able to connect them, as you say, in 350 globally. So, for example, connecting leaders from Latin America with leaders of Africa and seeing how this can work together, then I think, we're able to create systematic change, really linking the local with the global.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena. I love the connecting the dots from local action to global impact. And that brings us to this. I want to shift a little focus here and bring climate finance. I know Action Aid advocate for equitable climate finance. And my question to you, Naranjali, is like, but in reality, how much of the global climate funding actually reaches grassroots organizations? And what, from your experiences, what are the biggest barriers that are preventing funding from flowing directly into frontline communities?
Sure. You're going to see the super nerdy side of me come out now, dealing with numbers and money.
I'm trying to digest this visual.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I've provided this is to just show you how complicated it is, right? I wouldn't pay too much attention to the numbers here. This is a landscape of climate finance analysis that was done by Climate Policy Institute, CPI, but they're tracking all flows everywhere. So north, global south, global north. They're tracking all types of financial instruments. So it's kind of giving you a really, really macro level picture. But in the circles that we are working in, when we are talking about climate policy and most frontline communities, most of the time what we are looking at is how much money is actually flowing to communities in developing countries who tend to be hit hardest the most. Now, that's not to say that there aren't frontline communities in developed countries that also require assistance. But usually what we find is that developed countries have much more capacity to provide. Even if that's not happening, there is the capacity. Whereas in developing countries, and especially lower income and climate vulnerable countries, there just is not the fiscal space and the resource capacity to be able to provide funding. So if you just looked at, and these are estimates from Oxfam, if you looked at how much money flowed from developed countries to developing countries, overall in 2023, it would have been about $116 billion.
Wow.
Right. But a lot of that was loans, which need to be paid back. So if you counted what the grant equivalent piece of that is, it's actually closer to about 30 billion. Of that total, right, about 17% is probably reaching the community level. So it's not a lot at all. And we absolutely have to change that. Part of it is that you've got in a big global financial system, you've got so many intermediaries, right? You have a government that gives to the World Bank, that then gives to either a big international NGO or a corporation or a bank, and then they're giving it to someone at national level, and then they're giving it to someone at local level, and everybody's taking those costs, and so it sort of gets watered down by the time it gets down to the community. So one is there's an absolute need to reduce the number of intermediaries, but there's also a question of quality of the intermediaries as well. And in my experience, one of the big barriers that I see is that you have an international capital market. Um, a lot of the private financial flows are simply not appropriate for the kind of action we are talking about at local level because you have to make a profit. You have to make a 15%
Yeah,
return margin, which is just not going to work when we're talking about small scale um, solar energy in a community in Kenya or agroecology in a community in sub-Saharan Africa. There's a market creation aspect that will take many, 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 many years to come to fruition. And there's also, for me, just from a moral standpoint, we're trying to empower these communities, not extract money from them,
right.
right? So
Mm,
there's a little bit of a mismatch in kind of how the financial system operates and its motives and what we need for frontline communities. The other piece of it is also just the structures. Uh,
mm-hmm.
a lot of international finance, there's only a small amount that's actually grant-based that goes towards simply supporting communities without expecting a return. Uh, and because most of that money is in loans, you find that the financial structures also have to be in the form of loans of some kind. And there are some communities in which microloans can work, but in a lot of communities, like we're starting at a point where people are literally living from harvest to harvest. There is no capacity for loans. There are no assets to hold as collateral for loans, really. In some cases, women can't even access loans like legally. They need their husband to sign off. So if you're trying to empower women, you can't even, this is a massive access problem.
Right.
So we need to start with other kinds of financial solutions and then build up to see whether we can change the terms of how we think about finance at a global scale to actually suit what's needed locally rather than trying to impose the international structures on local communities in ways that are simply not compatible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naranjali. I, just love that. And I feel like this, also looking at this diagram, it feels like household and individual are surprising the large contributor to climate finance, right?
Yeah, it's interesting,
More,
right? Yeah.
more,
Yeah.
more in
Yeah,
more comparison to corporations or commercial financial institutes. So that's
precisely.
that's
Yeah,
super.
the other really interesting thing I'll say is that for the second year in a row, the net financial flows between Global South and Global North have been back to the Global North. So actually, developing countries overall, this is not just climate, but like
Mhm.
overall, are paying more to the Global North than the Global North than the developed countries are to developing. And this is because of debt,
Wow.
right? Debt repayments, etc. So that's
Yeah.
a new thing to
Super.
factor in.
Super fascinating. I guess, I mean, I want to bring all three of you into this question to wrap up this theme and especially ask for our innovators and entrepreneurs in the audiences, many of whom want to really get plugged in, want to help. What is one thing that they should really understand before, trying to partner up with a grassroots organization? And I guess, I mean, we can go in the order of Alana, Jenna, Naranjali. Just quick, like 30, 40 seconds thoughts.
For me, I would say that the most important thing is, I mean, it sounds very basic, but to know how to listen to the communities.
Mhm.
And as basic as that sounds, that's such a missing piece in a lot of these relationships. To know that the communities are the ones that know in depth the territories and the structures of the communities that they're in. So I think, yeah, like as simple as it sounds, it is often such a missing piece to actually listen to the communities on the ground and know that
Yeah.
they know their own solutions, I would say.
Thank you, Alana.
Yeah, Elena, I completely agree with you. It's really about listening and working with the communities. And then the other element I would add to that is the simplicity. And
Mm.
really, with the nature of what communities have been handed, again, not having as much resources, that means not enough education as well. These complex systems can be very challenging. And so, how to bring work with the communities on simple solutions, but always at the base of this is coming from the needs of the community. They're saying what they want, what they see as opportunities, and then working together to shape that into a reality for them.
Parul, I'm just going to ask you to repeat your question for me.
Yeah. No, I was just asking, like, just to wrap up this theme, I wanted to, if any advice you have for innovators and entrepreneurs here in the audiences who want to help and get plugged in and be part of the partner up with the grassroots organization, any advice you can give them?
Yeah, I so completely agree with what Jenna and Elena have said. What I'll add to that is that anyone who's going to engage with communities, uh, I think it's really important to understand the power dynamics at play,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what power does the community have? What power does the government have? Who are the other corporations who are involved? Because if we don't understand both the visible, the invisible, and the hidden forms of power, it's actually very difficult to figure out what kinds of activities and interventions can work well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Norishli. Next slide, please. This kind of brings us to our last theme of today, which is building resilience, inclusive climate future. What does it truly look like to build a resilient climate future? One which is rooted in equity, which is rooted in shared power, which is also justice for all communities. We know that climate crisis doesn't impact everybody equally. Women, youth, frontline communities, and marginalized groups often bear the heaviest burden. We know that. Yet they are also leading some of the most transformative solutions. So this theme kind of asks us to imagine a future where climate work isn't just about infrastructure or technology, but it's more about dignity. It's more about participation. It's more about redistribution of power. And I just want to, I want to explore like what does this inclusive leadership look like, and how global movements can internalize justice-centered principles, and how right-based approaches, especially around resources like water we were talking about, can shift our understanding of resilience. And I want to start with you, Niranjali. It's just a center approach to climate action, right? Which prioritize marginalized communities in all its work. What does this inclusive climate leadership look like in practice, especially in the communities that are facing climate crisis? And how does centering equity and the voices of those most affected actually change climate adaptation strategies?
Thanks. Parul, can you go to the next slide? Please. Okay, so I thought it would be useful to just show you this graphic because this is the kind of the signature that we have in all the programming work that we do. This is the multiple dimensions in which we think about enhancing the active agency of people in the communities and movements that we work in and work with. And I think the thing that's important to say is this is extremely difficult work. It's also really important work. And where we start is with centering the rights of people. Even before we talk about an issue like climate change or women's rights, there needs to be a deeper understanding specifically of people's civil rights and all of the other rights that go along with it. And it's from there that we then try to understand, okay, what are the challenges women? Let's focus on women. We also have programming with youth, but let's think about, okay, what are the challenges women are facing? Sometimes climate change is not even the thing that they want to talk about because what is climate change, right? What they're facing is there's gender-based violence in their communities, or because of weather-related shock, right? They have to take their girls out of schools, or the only way for them to survive is to give their girls away in marriage, right? Or force their boys to go work on the farms and pull them out of schools. So there is an intersectional analysis that first needs to happen if you
Mhm.
really want to center around communities. They don't live single issue lives, right? None of us do.
Yeah.
So we have to understand all those underpinnings, and this is in part why we don't just work on climate justice, right? We also work on economics, we work on women's rights, and we work on humanitarian response. Because in our experience, these are some like the three main buckets, and
Mm.
climate's sort of environment, inclusive of environment. Now, it's a lot of the environmental factors are now getting influenced by climate change. So that's why that's a focus. But you have to understand that if you don't get to the bottom of that, then we're not going to construct things that are actually meaningful for communities. The other aspect of that from a wider economic standpoint is to understand the power imbalances that exist in the community and the fact that there are resources, but they are not being distributed in equitable ways. And
Mhm.
that happens both in terms like if you look at it micro level at in local contexts, but also nationally and internationally. And that's why for us, when we talk about any policy that we are advocating for, there is that redistributive element that we're talking about, right? There is an imperative for developed countries that have largely contributed to a problem to be providing the support that is needed for those who are facing the consequences of it, who may not be living within their borders. And that redistribution really needs to happen. That's a core part of justice. And the other two pillars are resilience and response.
Mhm.
The resilience aspect, I will say, really does come from dialogue. It comes from understanding, look, where are the vulnerable points in the community, and then what can we do to backstop that? Sometimes there are technological, and I say tech, but it's low tech, right? Sometimes there are
Yeah.
technological solutions. Sometimes it's connecting them with decision makers and helping decision makers understand what the community's context is so that they can then do come up with solutions that work for the community. We did that with women's networks in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Ethiopia, and it was amazing how the central decision makers had no idea what the context was. And once they understood it, they could do things like set up seed banks, do cash transfers, and all the things that women needed to thrive in those areas. And the final thing is that shocks are going to happen. We're living in an increasingly like polycrisis oriented world, and we're going to have to be ready. And I say this as being part of the international development sector, ready to deploy humanitarian response. The last thing I'll say on this is that what we have found is that the women and the youth that we have worked with on other kinds of programming, the leadership that we have helped foster,
Mhm.
they tend to be the people who are also leaders in emergency response. It's incredible, right? To
Wow.
see it's
Wow.
like they just step in. And
Yeah.
we also only do humanitarian response in places where we have that kind of connection because that tends to be what's most responsive for the community.
Mhm. I love that, Narajli. This also reminds us that resilience, inclusive future cannot be built for communities. It needs to be built with them, right?
Yeah,
As
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can we go to the next slide, please? I guess this brings me to you, Elena. 350 emphasizes grassroots organizing across diverse communities, including women and youth leadership. What does inclusive community center organizing look like within the climate movements? And how can we kind of bring movement building principles like shared power or collective decision making into spaces like tech, entrepreneurship, and innovation?
Thank you, Parul. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit and go deeper into what was mentioned before about centering communities, no, into decision-making processes and power. And I think right now in Colombia, as you said, was at COP30, and we have a very exciting future ahead with a fossil fuel phase-out conference later in the year and other things. And well, a current government that is very much in favor of keeping fossil fuels in the ground and going towards a just transition. And I think you can see this example so leniently in La Guajira in Colombia, in the example of energy communities or comunidades energéticas. That is basically a system which we're also working with various communities in the region, that is about decentralization. And I think this is very important, not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of power, right? Because what we have found is that this is a trust transition out of fossil fuels is only really effective when it's decentralized and when power is given back to the communities. So in this example of the comunidades energéticas, which we're currently working in levels of government and communities to, develop, is that it is only working when the communities are the owners of the energy systems, and it is not a massively centralized way. And I think this is such an important example because in La Guajira, in the northeastern part of Colombia, where it's also the biggest open coal mine of Latin America, you can see that the Wayuu communities resisted for wind turbine projects that were imposed to them in their territories. And this is why, right? Because it replicated this system of a kind of, you know, up to bottom decision making when things are not led by the communities but are imposed by them. And that was a massive delay in the actual transition process to other energy systems. And yeah, for me, that was a super important example of how often when, maybe corporations come in without not knowing the culture, also often the cosmovision of these communities, these projects fail. And there's so much a waste of money, of time of everyone, because they don't take into account the local knowledge and the local, structures of power and everything like that. Um, some other examples that I wanted to show are the Chocohagua projects in El Cesar and Mujeres Sino in Ciénaga. These are projects that are led by women that are building alternatives to fossil fuels as the main source of income of economy. So, for example, Mujeres Innova have a network of over 150 groups of women that create forms of circular economies where they're able to, for example, do massive fairs of economy to exchange innovation and their projects and everything like that. But also, I think a massive aspect of this, and when you talk about, how we can replicate movement principles, is also care. And I think this is something that is often not taken into account because, for example, in both Choconjagua and Mujeres Sinoa, which are some of the many examples that we're working with, there is, an acknowledgement of the differentiated affectations that climate change and extraction can have on women, right? So these women, for example, have, take on the responsibility of like psychological and physical and emotional care due to the gender-based violence that has resulted of a mass fossil fuel extraction. So I think some of the movement principles that can be taken out of just like activism or social movements, I think definitely collective leadership. So, in these situations, one of the most popular ways of taking decisions, and it doesn't mean that there aren't roles and hierarchies, but it means that the decisions are taken from the bottom up, where people, for example, in assemblies, are the ones that bring the solutions, and then that is like swept upwards to the people taking the roles. And I think these movement principles of wider assemblies, of listening to all of the community members, can really be taken into other contexts and really also be used to make sure that the climate future is equitable and inclusive for many people.
Thank you. Thank you, Alana. And I'm looking at the time. I just want to have one last question, Jenna, for you, and then we can just jump into Q&A because I do feel like we're going to give folks some time. Jenna, this one I struggle, and maybe if you can keep it brief, that'd be great. This one is I struggle with personally also. Why water is about dignity and human rights and not just the meeting the basic need. And how do we move from this charity-based approach to the right-based approach so if you can just talk about a little bit about your thinking in that.
Yeah, when it comes to dignity, and again, what we're talking a lot about is like this redistribution of power.
Mhm.
And what ultimately many of us in the NGO sector have seen other examples of nonprofits coming in with a solution, with an agenda, or it's even just some grants saying, here's money only for this way of doing things. So then you're kind of in this position of like, oh, you have to pay these funds in this way because, again, that's where the power has lied. But really bringing in so important for Water for Life is empowering women to be leaders and collaborating with other COCODEs and the municipal members within their communities, the town council, where you start empowering the women to say, hey, there's an issue at hand. How can you find the confidence to talk with other members within your community to find these decentralized systems, which Elena was talking about as well, is it's so important to create these systems where it's in their own hands, it's within their own control. And so kind of talking about moving away from charity-based approaches into right-based, it really is it's working on this education and confidence skills that community leaders need to have to be able to create these changes and collaborations within the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenna. This concludes our moderated section of the panel. I know we were hoping to have 15 minutes, but I'm happy if panelists, you're okay to stay extra 5 minutes just to do a quick Q&A. Yeah, okay. Banu, I know you have been watching chat and questions. Can you please read them out, and panelists feel free to just take it away as you see them.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Parul, and thank you, our panelists, for this inspiring conversation. And we have got some questions coming into the chat. The first one should go to Niranjali. So can you provide examples of restructured finance? Where does it currently stand? And at what level does this decision need to be made?
Oh, wow. Yeah, just solve the whole problem. I think that I mean, it depends on where the community is, right? Some of the communities we work with, they're not ready for private sector investment, not yet, right? They need public investment in things like having cash transfers in crisis, seed banks, redesigning how communities are doing farming and food security, right? Which needs funding to first sort of create the conditions, and then you need to guarantee some sort of market for them, which also that's procurement. Those are government level policies. They could be local, they could be national. But you then have to create a market in which the women's livelihoods or community livelihoods can thrive. Once you get there, you could think about potentially microloan systems, but those microloan systems may need to be flexible, right? For example, I remember this was a long time ago. I don't know if this program still exists. It's not an ActionAid program, but it was one where a solar company in India called Selco worked with the the banking system to enable communities to get to get a loan, to be able to get the solar panel on their roof, to be able to charge a cell phone and have some lighting. Instead of having monthly payments, they told the bank, look, the communities get money when they sell their harvest, whether it's fishing or grain, whatever they're growing. So could you come up with a payment scheme that is twice a year or 4 times a year, something that is appropriate to the cycle in which communities are earning money? So this is the way, right, that I think we need to be thinking, and that is a local / national kind of conversation. There could be regional ones. I think what the international community needs to pay attention to is that when you're trying to crowd in finance, beyond the public sector, you have to figure out, okay, how can we do something that doesn't demand an economy of scale that's a multi-million-dollar project, right? Because that may not be appropriate, or loan repayment on terms that are not appropriate. Like, can you can you be flexible internationally about what the repayment needs to look like? And that's only when you get to that moment, right, where it's appropriate for a community, where their market is sufficiently developed to be able to absorb debt in a way that is equitable and not extractive.
Yeah, thank you very much for your response. Pearl, I want to check with you. I know this is a great conversation and you asked really smart questions already, and we can talk about this all day long, but I just want to also be respectful. I also know you want to wrap up things properly. So what would you like me to do? Ask more questions or?
I think I know that's fine. Maybe we can take one last question and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, so I think this will go to anyone who would like to chime in. So what is one lesson from your work that every climate activist should know?
Anyone?
I mean, I can go, but I've spoken, so if Jenna or Helena want to come in.
You can get the ball rolling, Ranjo.
Okay, I'll get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sure. I think it is to not think of climate as one issue, right? Like the communities that are frontline of the crisis, the climate is not the only thing they're dealing with. So if you're going to be a climate activist, you've got to be willing to lend support and understanding to the economic challenges, the women's rights issues, the disability, the marginalization of Indigenous peoples. Like you've got to be willing to lend your voice to those other issues, because if you miss that, we're not going to solve the climate crisis if we don't also lend support to these other issues. There's in the US, we work with youth climate activists, and one of the things we're seeing is that migrant justice activists are seeing the interconnections with climate, and these two communities are starting to work together. And with the kind of immigration challenges we're seeing, right, climate-induced displacement, some people are now moving geographies because of climate-induced shock. There's such an opportunity to work together, and if you only treat climate as a silo, then you miss the boat on these other massive social issues that are also important for helping build people power to solve the crisis and demand accountability from decision makers.
Thank you, Naranjali.
That was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. No, just to follow a bit on that, I would say just two quick things. One is one no, many yeses. For me, that is so essential. And that as a way to keep hope going. Like sometimes in the climate crisis, it's so easy for it to go into like this massive, nihilist catastrophe. But I think with the concept of one no, many yeses, it invites us to acknowledge that, yes, we have one common no, right? No to injustice, to exploitation, to further extractivism. But I think what really keeps hope alive, at least for me, and I know many others, is the diversity of solutions. And knowing that only through this diversity and like this maybe tapestry of solutions is that we will be able to actually do the social weaving to a future beyond the multiple crises that we are seeing today.
Yeah, and to also piggyback on what has been shared is a model with Water4Life is going more deeper into is the consortium, and to really see is that climate change has all of these different issues, and when you can collaborate with other organizations and other players, it just makes going into community-based problem solving together, and it makes, of course, the light loader.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alana, Jenna, Naranjali, for all your wisdom and inspiration and today's amazing session. And thank you for all the amazing work you are doing locally and globally. And audience, I hope you walk away today with some insights and that climate solutions are more than technical, it's more about power, dignity, and rights. Please check us out, Women in Cleantech. We have tons of more events. And also please check out action8 350.org and Water4Life and how you can be plugged into these amazing organizations. And we will be following up with more resources later. Thank you all for joining. Thank you. Have a lovely day.